Picture this, it's 2015. You're a teen who just walked out of Smosh, the movie. 1 year prior was the angry video game nerd movie. Then suddenly, a time traveler steps out of a portal. 10 years into the future, he says, there will be a year with 3 box office hits directed by YouTubers, and one of them will be Markiplier. Then he leaves, and you are cursed with that knowledge until 2026, 11 years later. Iron Lung, Obsession, and Backrooms are 3 movies made by YouTubers who didn't ascend through the traditional studio pipeline. In fact, for Iron Lung at least, it was made without an established studio or a distributor entirely. All 3 of these managed to make multiple times their budget, becoming wild financial successes. The first thing I need to emphasize is that this is not a trend. It's a collection of separate data points that happens to be located in a single year, but in fact, these are 3 very different types of movies. One of them is an IP movie, one of them is a movie star vehicle, one of them is a high-concept movie. All 3 of these had different roads to financial success, so it's a mistake to try and treat them as though they belong together. Let's start with Backrooms, since it's looking to be the biggest of the 3. It's a classic IP-driven movie, just like how movie studios once pulled from books, comic books, and now video games and other digital media. Backrooms is an intellectual property with a pre-established fan base. Iron Lung is sort of the most interesting of the 3 if you count everything except for the movie itself, because the story of how it was made and distributed is pretty insane, honestly. Of course, it's impossible for anyone else to pull that aside from Markiplier or a Markiplier tier YouTuber, but the amount of YouTubers who are at that level who can also adequately star in or direct a film is 0, or close to it. I've been following Markiplier for a while. In Space with Markiplier is one of my top films on Letterboxd because I found it to be so creative and executed surprisingly well, but if I started going on about it, I'd never stop. One day, when I'm secure enough to not worry about whether a video I make will succeed, I'll make a whole video on his cinematic journey. Anyways, back to Iron Lung. It's more of a typical star-driven movie, except for the fact that it was entirely driven by one-man's stardom. Ordinarily, there'd be some producers making the movie a thing with their financial contributions. There would be a distributor that actually handles the movie and gets it out there to theaters. They would also probably handle marketing, but nope. To all of these, it is just Markiplier and his people, his subordinates, and his fans. Don't quote me on this, but I believe that Iron Lung is the largest movie to ever be made without a film studio or a distributor. It's the type of miracle that could only happen when you cross over an insanely dedicated fan base and a lack of controversy. If you have one but not the other, you can do numbers on streaming at best. You need both to convert people who are vaguely aware of your brand and convince them to spend $15 on the ticket to your movie because they can generally associate you with good vibes and an underdog story. The funniest thing about Iron Lung is when I watched it, I was sat next to this 8-year-old kid, and he was far better behaved than the teens I sat in front of in Backrooms. The 8-year-old kid offered me some of his popcorn, the teens threw popcorn at each other and me, and laughed in an annoying falsetto voice. As for the movie itself, it was good. It really cannot be understated that just the ability to make a movie take place in a micro set like this with only one person to act is impressive, and all praise goes towards the cinematographer in helping to make this happen. Now, I thought Markiplier was a good director, and honestly, he was even a good actor at times, but he wasn't the best editor for the job. The movie was a bit too long, that's for certain. There's about 15 or so minutes that could have been shaved off in the middle to improve flow. I would love to see him commit fully as either an actor or a director, because if he makes another movie with a larger scope, he'll definitely need the ability to delegate. Yes, it did work for In Space with Markiplier, but that's the sort of once-in-a-lifetime, lightning-in-a-bottle masterpiece which you cannot reliably replicate. Before we talk about Digital Circus, which I watched last week, we have Obsession, which has done obscenely well for itself and is Focus's top movie of all time at $242 million. The previous top movie for that studio was Downton Abbey, so that's saying something. I'll be frank, as of watching this video, I unfortunately haven't watched Obsession. However, I can still talk about the numbers. it made $17.2 million on opening weekend, which is already a decent sum, but then it increased week over week for 2 weeks despite not opening in any new theaters. The last time something like this was accomplished? E.T., 1982. That's how insane of a feat we're talking about here. And yes, there are other movies that increased week over week, but those ones actually expanded their theater count and Obsession didn't. Anyways, Obsession is likely the cheapest movie on this list at $750K for its budget, but it is possible, though unlikely, that the Amazing Digital Circus was able to undercut it. We will never know as it is a private company. Financially, by multipliers, this is probably the best performing movie. It made 322 times its budget, but in terms of rewarding the people who worked on it, Iron Lung's crew is winning. Markiplier, as the sole financial investor in the movie, was able to give his entire crew a large bonus in celebration of the film's success. Obsession obviously did not. This isn't to blame Curry Barker, or Focus, or anyone really, for the way that the movie industry works. It's simply to point out that this is a sobering reality in which the only way to get your crew to share in the profits of their success is to be a famous multimillionaire, completely outside of the studio system. Anyway, speaking of Curry, he's actually the one YouTuber I didn't know about before this movie. I watched Kane Parsons' Backrooms and some of his Attack on Titan stuff. I obviously watched Markiplier. Hell, I even watched SMG4 when I was a kid and was one of the first people to catch Meta Runner when it first came out. Yeah, I didn't finish it, but it's the thought that counts. So Curry is really the only one that I hadn't watched beforehand, but honestly, it seems like his movie far exceeded his existing fan base anyways. So I just want to say, good for him. He's got an amazingly bright future ahead of him, and I'm excited to see where he goes from here. I originally wasn't going to cover Digital Circus when I wrote this script, because I assumed that it wouldn't do so well. What I can say for certain is that it'll be controversial through no fault of its own. I plan on making a video to cover the whole thing, so if you'd like to see that, please subscribe. It would really help out the channel. Going back to Digital Circus, this is a fourth type of movie. The best way to compare it is to anime movies, something like Jujutsu Kaisen Execution, where the first part is something that aired on TV already, and the second half is something that they'll air in the future. Here, the rationale for buying the ticket is to support your favorite show, or just to get ahead of everything before the spoilers come out. Originally, because I and many others knew that the movie would end up being released as an episode on June 19th, a mere 3 weeks after the theater release, I assumed that the movie would not make that much money. I'll admit that I was wrong. Yes, it's obviously front-loaded, and yes, it won't make as much as any of the other movies here, duh, but it's still a wild financial success. Even assuming Glitch spends, say, $10 million an episode, the movie is still gonna be profitable just from its first weekend, and $10 million is an insane amount of budget. I don't think even Arcane cost that much. Let me say something right now. The kids who were in the theater, when they saw the QR code and the merch at the end credits, they started clamoring for that shit. I mean, really hooting and hollering and yelling. They wanted that Jax plushie, that Pomni bucket, or whatever the hell was up there. It was insane. I can guarantee you that Glitch is gonna make money hand over fist from the merch that they're selling off of this movie. And possibly one of the funniest parts of the circumstances surrounding this movie is seeing a grifter make a transphobic tweet about Gooseworks and their right-wing audience actually blasting them for it. I really underestimated the universal appeal that this show has, and it's kind of insane that some actual transphobes are treating Goose better than some nominal allies. Of course, it doesn't necessarily make them better people, but it's still an example of dramatic irony. So, what went wrong with movies in the 2010s? I think it comes down to the fact that the role of a YouTuber is simply closer to a director than it is an actor. They belong behind the camera, not in front of it. This sounds like a weird thing at first, because most YouTubers literally are in front of the camera, but hear me out. A big thing for YouTube is authenticity. That means that they're not really playing a character, they're just exaggerating existing emotions that they have. It doesn't lend itself towards being able to play a charismatic, different, and unique character on screen. What they do have, though, is a keen eye for the clips and moments that will bring out the most appealing side of themselves, and staging and editing those moments. That's director work. While the AVGN movie had the angry video game nerd as a director, there are just so many videos on why it didn't end up working out, and while Markiplier was an actor in Iron Lung, he had to work at it for years in order to reach a level where he felt like he actually fit in a movie. Even In Space with Markiplier, which I laud, doesn't make Mark feel like a character. It succeeds because he's placed on the familiar persona that people already know, and he layered his performance with nuance. It's a deeply personal story, and I believe that helps bring out an authentic performance even as his technical skill was lacking. That aside, there's no denying that studios sought YouTubers as acting talent in the 2010s, and
He could only have gotten that idea from Benjamin Netanyahu.
they weren't suited for that job, so they flopped. Now, in the 2020s, the YouTubers are coming to them. They're using YouTube as a way to hone their craft before making big moves, rather than letting success come to them randomly. I believe the average successful YouTuber nowadays is going to be far more skilled at editing and storytelling and general direction than the average YouTuber in the 2000s or the 2010s, who are generally far more amateur. And of those YouTubers, some of them are going to be exceptional. What I think we're seeing now is those exceptional YouTubers, the cream of the crop, who are now building this pipeline into their dream job as a director on a larger scale. And to me, that's honestly beautiful.